But I think with that said, let me hand it over to you, Kristina. Thank you very much.
No, thanks everybody for joining. And yeah, happy to leave time for questions, but I'm also like a really big conversationalist. And so feel free to just like jump in and ask questions. Don't feel like this is a formal thing. And definitely just happy to answer questions. But also if you're like, hey, I have this like special use case, have you seen this? Or how would that work? Or I disagree with you because this doesn't work, or I've tried that and it works, let me know. I'm always very curious how things work in other organizations and other places. So let me see if I can, first of all, handle technology, which is like the biggest first thing I think anybody has to tackle. So wanted to talk a little bit today about the next level and enabling marketers. And the reason I wanted to talk about this, because it's near and dear to my heart. One of the challenges that I've been fascinated by for years now is this very real problem that we've had, which I suspect a lot of you know about, which is we've, for many years, put what I call guidance set right out there for marketers. There are these lovely shelfware documents, usually PDFs, that go either on the intranet or some sort of a shared drive, a G drive, and they provide handy dandy guidance either on how you have to do a type of marketing or how you have to set up a website. And depending on which organization you're a part of, they tend to be lovely guidance sets. The one that's, on the far left-hand side is one of my all-time favorite guidance sets. It's a set of policies and standards that I found at a recent client site. And the reason it's my favorite thing is because they have like a brand guide, a code of conduct, but then code exceptions, which I think is hilarious because it's like if you have exceptions, then there's no rules in my book. But then they had a slew of these policies, and amongst them was like a marketing guide for North America and a marketing guide for Europe and a marketing guide for UK. And then there was this like marketing guide for rest of world. And I think what's really interesting is we hire these highly competent, smart people, whether you call them digital operations people or, digital marketers or webmasters. I don't care what title they get, but we hire these really smart, competent people into the enterprise. And then we kind of treat them with this horror where we give policies and standards out to folks and we say, here, go find these answers in this slew of documentation. And it's kind of a mean thing to do, right? We wouldn't ever do this to our consumers, but somehow we think it's okay to do this to employees and basically say, go find the answer out for yourself in this slew of documentation. And so to me, that seemed like a nightmare, and it seemed like a nightmare for years now. And it gets worse, right? Because it's not just about finding the document, but it's inevitably that when you find that policy or that standard document, which I think is never exciting enough that you want to swap it for like Netflix on a Friday night, right? Nobody says, I want to read this 27-page document instead of having fun times. But then you start to read this guide and it says something like, and I actually had to highlight this. I was like, oh my gosh, this is a real thing. It says like all users, regardless of departments, should comply with all university policies, federal, state, and local laws, rules, and regulations. It's like you, my dear web manager, or my dear marketer, or my dear digital operations manager, you must understand and comply with all of these local laws and rules and regulations. So you must become a student of law. Give up your nighttime hobby and become a student of law. It just seems really ridiculous to me, right? Or even things like when I go into a corporation and they say like, oh yeah, the general manager in Singapore needs to, or their delegate needs to approve all email copy. The thing that jumps to my mind is like, really, the general manager has nothing better to do than approve email copy, right? So it's like we're asking people to do these ridiculous things when I think, and I think it's true, I think that really what we need to do is empower marketers and digital ops folks to have freedom and creativity and innovation to do what they're really good at, which is create these campaigns and these go-to-market strategies and things that they're really great at, like content that's like really awesome to use. And so we need to create that framework where they have that ability to innovate and do cool stuff, not having to like worry about mother may I continuously, right? And not having to actually deal with trying to find the answers to what are they allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. And so this has been an issue for many, many years. In fact, I wanted to grab this. This is public knowledge, which I think is hilarious. This is like the ultimate may I set out there. This is the Heineken guide. And they actually tell their marketing team that not just legal, but legal and corporate affairs has to be involved as early as possible in all creative discussions. And it always dawns on me that if legal and corporate affairs is involved as early as possible, chances are there's like going to be no creative discussion because it just like shuts it down before you can even start. And so to me, that's like a no-go. And so back when the Ebola epidemic started in like 2013 to 2016, it dawned on me that it was taking a really long time for us to get copy out the door. At a time when it was really critical for corporations, especially pharmaceuticals, to communicate as fast as possible, right? It's like we were trying to get copy out the door within hours, and yet we were like, pharmaceuticals are known for taking at least 20 days to get copy out the door. So in 2019, we actually tried this pharmaceutical experiment where we got approval of copy down from some crazy amount of days, like 21 days to 3 days using a chatbot. And what we did is we deployed a set of policies and standards in a preconditioned environment where we said, look, what would happen if we gave users the ability to understand what all the requirements were for their content, right? So they just go in and they say, here's what I'm trying to do. Can you target for me a set of must-do requirements and give them basically a checklist where they can create their own checklist of here's what I shall do, here's what I should never do, here's my set of requirements. Can they go in a regulated industry and create for themselves a checklist of compliance, create their content, their imagery, et cetera, and then submit that through legal in a way that says, I'm already compliant before it enters your queue. And so basically, it's almost like a stamp through approval through legal, right? Legal doesn't have to pay that much attention because they can kind of just go, yep, you did this, you did this, you did this, you did this, you did this. It's almost like a really quick check through and it's done. They don't have to go back to square one. They're just validating. And so that seemed like a really, really great idea. And that was back in 2019. What I've been working on since then with several different companies, and I think it's really cool, which is what I thought I would come and share with you today, is this kind of like new version 6.0, because we've been evolving on this concept for a while now. And it's a chatbot, but the chatbot actually integrates into the enterprise for marketers. So rather than just spewing to the marketer guidance that they need in context, which I think is already cool enough because you don't have to go actually seeking guidance around what can I do or what do I have to pay attention to. You can get that in context for what you're doing. On the back end, it actually integrates into the enterprise. So for example, if I'm sitting in Northern Virginia, very close to where Carrie is, I think she's also Northern Virginia, I can actually enter a question, let's say, I don't know, I want to hire a brand ambassador, for example. I can actually get my chatbot to give me guidance on hiring a brand ambassador. But on the back end, what my chatbot is actually doing is giving a heads up to legal that I'm looking to hire a chatbot, that they might need to actually do a clearance on that person, on whoever I'm looking for an influencer perspective. Procurement, that I might be coming down the pike and need to actually do a contract of some sort as well, so that those two entities know to talk. But the actual chatbot is creating intelligence to see if anybody else throughout the world is using a similar type of influencer, doing a similar type of campaign, and looking for the same type of artifacts that have been created already. So we're not having to recreate the same thing. So it's looking for efficiencies throughout the enterprise. It's also looking at, has anybody within the last 3 months looked at the same type of query to understand, can I start to collaborate with peers, or are there opportunities for efficiencies amongst my peers for the same type of marketing campaign or the same type of work that I want to be doing? The last thing it's doing is looking to see if I have budget. So it's actually pinging my finance people to understand how much money I have in the bank. Can I actually afford to actually have an influencer brought on board, or am I flying under the radar in terms of how much money I'm spending on this? And so it's interesting because there's a slew of back office processes that are running on top of this chatbot, and it's helping everybody throughout the enterprise be highly efficient around what I'm doing, as well as give me the context that I need to deliver what I need to go to market with just in time. What we are doing at the same time is trying to integrate into the dam. So if there are any type of artifacts that have been created, we can actually try to repurpose those. And that idea came last year from the fact that I was working with a company that was creating these artifacts for their India market. And what we found out is the Indonesia market was able to repurpose 70% of the same digital assets that we were creating for the India market, but nobody knew it because nobody was talking to each other between those two marketplaces. And so on top of the ability to kind of match what was happening in those two markets from an AI perspective, we benefited from that exchange of information happening on a match by match basis on the back end. And so it's kind of an interesting way to layer on information on the back end without asking marketers, digital ops folks, content creators to do any additional work beyond what they're already doing, and giving them the digital carrot of not having to stay up at night and look through any kind of documentation, kind of go through and ransack intranets looking for guidance documents, or scroll through all of those PDFs that none of us really like at the end of the day. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So that's kind of the project. So I thought I would kind of just start to share with you a little bit of this little chatbot thing. It's kind of interesting. Can't show you the back end yet. I'm hoping that by the time that we see each other this fall, we get to the point where we've completely stood up in our dummy environment, the back end, in a way that we can sanitize it. So maybe we can show you some of the processes in the back end, because that would be the cool part, I think. To be able to see some of that and how it might work, and be able to demonstrate some of that aspect. But I'll show you the demo in a second. But let me pause for a second because I think I saw a hand go up, and I do want to make sure that we have the conversation as we're going along.
I think that was more like the modern way of saying "so far so good." The problem is a real problem shared by others. I think that was it.
That was it.
I didn't even see where it came from, but yeah,
Okay.
the problem is definitely real. Marketing can't find the answers, having to act as superheroes, and then this always having to ask, "May I?" Does that sound familiar, Kate? Just to pick on you while Kristina is getting their demo ready. Let's see.
Kate doesn't have that problem. Nobody has that problem.
I think Kate may have just gone on mute. That's the problem when you pick on somebody and you can't see them. But I can pick on you, Dennis. Where are you joining us from today?
Oh, Barbados, where I've moved. Yeah, this is very interesting, especially in the pharma context. There's so many hoops to jump through, medical review, all of those sorts of things. What sorts of challenges or pitfalls do you foresee in taking this sort of approach? First of all, I guess to set up the chat bots, what has the relevant knowledge, and then how would perhaps folks in the legal department, how are they feeling about the potential maybe pitfalls of said approach?
Yeah, so we've actually piloted this in the pharma environment. So we've already done this. So this isn't like pipe dream-ish. We've actually piloted to see, can we do this? And can folks actually kind of make this a reality? And so the answer is yes. There's comfort, especially in the pharma space. Now, there's not comfort in terms of, let me take my hands entirely off the wheel, right? Content will never go out the door without a medical advisory sign off. Like, that's never going to happen. But what folks feel really comfortable with is getting a whole package that says, here's my checklist, here's my content, everything here ticks and ties. And here's how I've actually identified my requirements that apply. Now I'm submitting it to you for final sign off. And here are all of my screenshots. For example, here's how that content appears on an iPad with this versioning. Here's how that appears on my mobile phone. Here's how it appears in these versions of desktop browsers, and all of that in a single packet. So it speeds up the approval process because they can see exactly all of the disclaimers in context. They can see everything at once, so they don't have to go and test all of that themselves.
Wonderful. And just as a quick follow-up,
Yeah.
Any integrations planned, content platforms or anything on your sort of roadmap? What are you thinking about that?
So you can actually integrate this with anything really. I mean, and just because of ChatGPT and where we're going in that space right now, right? That's like the next logical step, right? You can integrate that kind of any place you would want to integrate it. In fact, we were looking at, could you replace this type of engine with ChatGPT? And there's not as much logic yet that we can see. So there's still value, I think, in mapping of the policies and the standards internally to an actual chat tool. Down the road, probably. But absolutely mapping it into a content management system makes sense. We started from a DAM perspective because it was a little bit easier to repurpose of content, and it was the value proposition from that perspective. The next piece that we're looking at is backing into a content management system, but from a language translation and localization perspective, because we think that that's the biggest value ROI. Right. So that's, I think, like the repurposing of content once it's gone through the translation and localization process. Like, can we actually use the same content in France as we can in Quebec? That type of use case, if you will. That makes the most sense. Yeah. And I think, the next question I think in my mind too is, does this start to translate really well across industries? Because right now we've been playing in pharma mostly. But then the question becomes, can you just as easily go into the financial sector, and is there the comfort level or not?
Very good. Why don't we have a closer look, Kristina?
Yeah, and I'm just kind of curious, Dennis, are you in the pharma space? Because it sounds like you are, but I'm not sure.
Sorry, myself?
Yeah, are you in the pharma space?
We're an agency. We have a customer that is in the pharma space and has a particular challenge.
Yeah, so this might be a thing, but it's interesting because you can do it across the board for anybody. So anyway, all right, so back to the concept of it. I mean, this is not a very sophisticated front end. Like I said, it's more about what's happening in the back end that gets exciting. The thing to me that's kind of cool is I can say things obviously like I'm interested in.
Can you zoom in a slight bit, Kristina? Plus a slight bit for those of us who are plus 25. Thank you, Kristina. That helps, yeah. I'm interested in hiring a new brand ambassador, a new influencer. But you went on mute, Kristina, perhaps in hitting those buttons. But perhaps I can voice over while you type. I'm not sure that's going to go well. So we can see Kristina typing, but she went on mute.
Oh, there we go. Is that better?
Yes. So now we can hear you as well.
That's
Hiring
helpful.
an influencer for my location, do I need to do anything?
For ads, right? So like that would be my questions. Like that's just, I don't know, to me, that's an interesting thing because oftentimes when I want to hire a new influencer, I want to have them, for example, do ads, whether it's on social media or it's maybe radio or, depending on the location, right? And so in this instance, I'm like, hey, do I have to do anything new for ads? They're like, yes, you do. It depends. An individual is generally an influencer or an endorser if they speak on behalf of our media and they do media connections to their brand. So they have to actually disclose this ad. What's interesting is the moment that I ask about this, what's happening again behind the scenes, right, is there's actually a tag that's saying, I, Kristina, and because I'm logged into the network, it already knows that I'm Kristina. It knows where I'm located, so I don't have to actually identify myself. It knows I'm in marketing, right? And it's actually capturing all of that, plus the fact that I've just said that I want to hire a new influencer for my location. So they know I'm in Northern Virginia. I want to do a new influencer. I'm trying to figure out something for ads. And so they're starting to actually pull together a set of guidance. What's really cool is we can actually, based on an existing profile, for example, let's say that I also did this campaign last year and hired an influencer last year for a similar campaign, and we had the budget last year, that entire guidance set can actually be already profiled for me, right? Because it might have been the same type of campaign. So it's already saying, can I show you more information on influencer guidance? It's actually grabbing guidance from last year and pre-populating that guidance for me, right? So it's not going to give me generic stuff. It's actually going to say like, okay, I'm thinking about what you did last year and try and populate that for me. So the answer is yes, I do want more. So it's telling me that I need to remember that media placement refers to digital media channels where we may place our brand's content, right? And so this is a thing. Like last year, I actually had website, mobile channel, right? I did advertising on third-party sites, social media. I talked about Facebook pages in my last year campaign. And we did brand ambassador, I guess, last year as well. And we did have employee disclosures last year as well, right? So it's actually prompting me to other things based on some of the types of things that I previously asked it, or the type of campaigns that I've actually done historically as well. So it's taking me down this path of the things that I might need to know based on what I've done in the past, right? And it's going to start taking me down a tunnel of the types of things that I need to know. Now, if Giannis was asking about the same types of things at the same time, it might actually suggest like, hey, do you two want to talk to each other? Because it sounds like you're starting to work on the same type of campaign. Is it worthwhile for you to talk to each other? If we're both, let's say, working at a pharma company, the logic will probably be no, we will not be introduced to each other at that same level unless we are working maybe on digital imagery, perhaps, because the regulations in Denmark are different in the US. But it can actually take that distinguishment down to a very interesting level. For example, it knows to tell Giannis that in Denmark, employees are not allowed to like a post, like a press release, for example. Sitting in Denmark, you are not allowed as an employee to like a press release, even if it's an official company press release of a new pharma drug that's being released into the marketplace. Whereas in the US, I can actually, as an employee, like a press release about a new drug that's about to hit the marketplace or that's hitting the marketplace. So that would be a disclosure that I can actually make, and that's the guidance that I would be given. And so that's like a coordination thing, right? So that's where it starts to distinguish between different folks who are in different places of the world.
Cool. Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you for showing us this.
Yeah.
I didn't expect a live demo, but I can definitely see how it solves the problem that you described in the opening. I can definitely see how this is the next level of enabling marketers as we promised in the meeting invite. So thank you. I think this is really interesting, and I can see how also this is valuable beyond pharma for sure. There's tons of things. Can I get approval to travel? What do I need to do to reimburse my expenses? Where's the logo guidelines? All of these things that I think are also relevant if you're working in an agency or if you're working really anywhere.
Yeah, and I think that those are like the easy ones, right? To me, that's like the easy stuff that everybody usually finds. Like, what's the mileage reimbursement this year is stuff that people usually find really easy on the intranet. Those are not the things that are a pain in everybody's rear end. The big stuff is like, how do I handle personal data from consumers? Like, that's the stuff that marketers actually lose sleep over because they're like, I don't know this. Iowa just passed a new data privacy law last week. Literally, they did. Right? Yeah. What the heck do I need to do? Or do I need to even worry about that? And do I have to call somebody up in legal and learn about that? And so that's, I think, where the money for the value is in doing something like this, is that you take hours away from marketers having to think about things that are not in their wheelhouse and that they shouldn't even have to think about, and free them up to be creative and letting them focus on stuff that's in their bellywick.
Very good. Very good. Carrie wrote a comment. Do you want to just briefly elaborate, Carrie, or?
Oh. No, Kristina, you just said something about, oh, those are the things people can easily find on their intranet, as
Okay,
as if
easier.
that were even possible. But I definitely see how this is much more important when it comes to regulatory content that can change. You know, things like this are changing in the US quite quickly these days. So to have I mean, it's a similar thing that we're tackling with the single source of truth for content, and enabling it to be updated quickly and access without having to know where it's stored. So I think there's a lot of possibilities here, and I can also get ideas about integrating it into a CMS to find that right in the moment, to find the rules and guidelines right in the moment when you're creating content.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to me because to me, this is helpful from a rules and regulations perspective, but I think that that's like 35% of the game. I think the other part of that is really the repurposing of content across the board. It's that, hey, India's creating this content. The Indonesia market can repurpose a lot of this content. Let me snatch that and not have to start from scratch again, right? That's a use case.
Yeah, and that's the back end that you're talking about.
That's the back end, because those two markets don't necessarily talk to each other. They never would. And marketers don't necessarily go like, yeah, let me just reach out and wave at people and go like, hey, what's everybody working on out there? Right? Because it's like, dude, I have deadlines. I got to get the stuff done, right? I don't have time to chit chat. And so that's a way to have somebody make those connections automatically for you and understand, yeah, these goals actually overlap. That's one thing. I think the other part of this too, which I think is really, really fascinating, is can somebody just constantly be looking and monitoring around what is your spend this year, right? And if you have a campaign that you're putting up there and your campaign is working, what I want to do is understand that that campaign is working. And from a management perspective, I want to throw more money at that. That's where I want to invest more money. So you can actually tie that analytics back into budgeting and finance as well. So there's a whole back end office opportunity here to management that comes in as well. And so I think this is kind of a cool opportunity that organizations aren't looking at, because instead they're still in the mindset of like, no, let's do one more policy document as a PDF and put it on the intranet, because no, really, that's the solution.
What a strong finish, Kristina. Clearly, Carrie, and you hit a nerve right there. Bingo. Thank you very much. I think this is what we had. Kristina, thank you once again for taking the time to share with us. I think this is really, really interesting. I think the next level is quite important in this chaotic time that we're living in, strained for resources, people increasingly being asked to do everything on their own with smaller teams, etc. So looking forward to seeing where you take this, and I'll turn this into a blog post, but keep us posted, right?
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time.
So much.
Have a good afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are.